Rev up your engines!
Omar Lopez, exercise machinist, said, "When did GM make good cars?" A long time ago. I learned to drive on a Chevy Biscayne, had a big V8 engine. Man, that was a well-built vehicle. Yeah, it wasn't that great on gas, but gas back then was 35 cents a gallon, so people didn't care all that much, and it was a solid, reliable vehicle. Then in the 70s, they started getting weaker, and then in the 80s, they started making junk, and then since then, they've gone down it even further. But back in the day, and way back in my grandfather's day, yeah, they made great vehicles, but times are changing. They didn't follow with the times. They just started making things cheaper and cheaper. That's the way the cookie crumbles. If you're a big corporation, then you end up not caring about your customers anymore. Look at the thing they had with the ignition switch. They lied about it. They had problems. They even changed the part number to make it look like it was a different one. I mean, any company that does that's just saying they don't care about you. Woodworking Next says, 2010 Tahoe, PPV, good choice? No, bad choice. It's a 10-year-old GM, and they fall apart. Now, I have customers that have bought those because they wanted a vehicle that had a lot of space inside, which it does have. But then every single one of them said, oh, it was always breaking. The transmission would go out. The electronics would go out. They're not very well-made vehicles. And they're big. They hold a lot of people. But over time, they're not dependable. And that one's 10 years old now because the 2020 models are out. Don't buy it unless you get it dirt cheap and it's got less than 100,000 miles. And you're only going to use it like on the weekends to do stuff. You can't buy something like that and expect to drive it 15, 20,000 miles a year. It'll fall apart and cost you a fortune. Adam Moore says, Scotty, I just purchased my first used car. What do you think of an 07 Volvo V70 2.5 D5? What should I look for? It has 118,000 miles on it. All right, I hope you didn't pay much for it because as they age, Volvos often become endless money pits. But if you get one cheap enough, you never know. It might last a while. I got a customer's got one of those things, and they bought it used from a friend for a couple grand. They have fun driving around. They're nice, luxurious cars. There's no arguing that. But they have very weak automatic transmissions. You want to baby that. You want to change the engine oil. I would change it every 4,000 miles on that one because you don't want to ruin that expensive Volvo engine. They're very expensive, but they're well-made engines. You keep oiling them, don't overheat them. They can last quite some time. So, good luck with that. I just hope you didn't pay too much money. And Volvo isn't making regular gasoline and diesel cars anymore. The Chinese own them now, and they say they're going to go electric. Eventually, nobody's going to make parts for the things anymore. Sam Ederman says, Scotty, when I was turning left about 10 miles an hour, gave it a bit gas, the transmission slipped. What's going on? Well, unfortunately, your transmission's going out. If they start slipping, there's only two things that can make them slip. Either your CV axle is breaking down and it's slipping because when you turn, it's not grabbing anymore, or the transmission's going out, but you said it slipped. When the axles go, they almost always clack. You hear them clack, 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 then you know they're worn out. That's obvious. And jack it up, you'll see the rubber boots are up, the grease are out. Pray it's that. But normally, if it actually slips, the transmission's starting to go out. But pray it's one of the joints. And if it's the inner joint, they can sometimes pop out and slip like that and then go back in. Pray it's your CV axle with the joints going bad and not the transmission itself. Jack says, what are your thoughts on rotary engines? Well, the German that invented them, Wankel, had an interesting idea because really, when you think about it, piston engines, the pistons go up and down, and they spin a crankshaft up and down. So they got to go up and then they got to stop and go down, where a Wankel rotor engine is rotary. It just spins. It has kind of a triangular wedge-shaped thing with seals on the ends, the apex seals, and spins around. So great idea. Instead of going up and down, it spins. More efficient, right? Well, actually not, because they get horrible gas mileage. That was the problem. When Mazda first sold those early model with the Wankel engines, the Mazda Cosmos, were they piles of junk. And that thing got like 8 miles a gallon. But the worst thing was, it had a 4-barrel carburetor on it, and they were so poorly made with those seals that as they age, whenever you turn them off and you'd count 1, 2, 3, and they'd go bang, because gas would go in the exhaust, heat up, and then explode. They were absolute piles of junk. Now, in the end, they were decent engines, but they always either burned oil or polluted too much. So, that's what you got to worry about with those. But I was just reading, Mazda may be bringing it back again, but in a real oddball scene. They're working on electric vehicles, but they don't have a long enough range for the United States. So they said they're going to have an electric vehicle, then they're going to put a Winkle engine in it as the range extender to make it go further. So it would be an electric motor. When it ran out of battery power, the little Winkle engine would run in power, which isn't a bad idea because, see, they're small. They don't take up much space. So it would be a good backup motor, really. I just read that, so who knows? Maybe that'll come to fruition one day. Omar Lopez. I got an '06 Honda Odyssey. I lose power steering fluid. My mechanic can't find a leak. Says the hoses are good. It's been going on for 6 months. Could it be the pump? Yeah, it could be lots of things. One, you need a real mechanic. The guy's an idiot. Anybody can find leaks these days. They make ultraviolet leak dye, and it's great stuff. You pour a little bit, like in that case, about 1/4 of an ounce of the dye in the power steering reservoir. Then you see where the leak comes out using an ultraviolet light and yellow sunglasses. You can get a kit for like $25 at AutoZone for stuff like that. Either the hose is leaking, or the pump is leaking, or the rack is leaking. But wherever it's leaking, it's leaking. So it's going to be dripping out. And that dye, which fluoresces either bright yellow or bright green, when you test it, will show you where the leak is. From my experience with those Hondas, it's almost always the high pressure hose. That's what goes out on the Hondas. The high pressure hose goes all over the place. Big, giant, long thing. I just changed one on one. It's a giant pain in the butt, but that's normally what goes. Pray it's not the rack, because they cost a small fortune on a Honda. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.